I'm Faye Kessler, 29 years old. 2 years ago, my parents took the $430,000 they made from selling the only rental property they owned, the house my grandfather built with his own hands, and gave every dollar of it to my brother for his restaurant franchise. They sat me down at the kitchen table not to ask my opinion as a licensed CPA who had spent 6 years reviewing financial statements for a living, but to watch me listen while my brother explained his vision. When I pointed out that his projections assumed a 38% profit margin in an industry that averages 5, my mother set her fork down and said, "You have never once believed in him." Not once. 2 years later, at Easter Sunday dinner, in front of 22 relatives, 2 federal investigators walked through the front door. And the first words my brother screamed as they crossed the threshold were, "Faye knew. She signed the loan documents. She is part of this." Before I tell you what happened next, take a moment to like and subscribe if any part of this resonates with you. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Okay. Now let me tell you how we got there. I grew up the second child in a family that operated on a single unspoken rule. My brother was the sun, and everything else, including me, was just sky around him. He was 4 years older, and by the time I was old enough to notice, the shape of our family had already hardened. He got the window seat on road trips. He got the loudest applause at every recital. He got his college fund restocked without being asked. I got told I was responsible, which I later learned was the family word for, "We don't need to worry about you because you take care of yourself." The clearest memory I have of understanding my place was the summer I graduated summa cum laude from State University. My parents threw my brother a dinner that same weekend. A celebration for a sales job he had landed, which he would quit 4 months later. The dinner was at a nice restaurant downtown. My graduation ceremony was a Tuesday afternoon on a football field. My mother hugged me in the parking lot after, said she was proud, then asked if I'd noticed how well my brother's new blazer fit. I nodded. I drove home. I made myself pasta and sat at my kitchen counter and tried to name the feeling in my chest. It took me years to understand it wasn't inadequacy. It was just what happens when someone has already decided you don't need the room. I built a life anyway, the only way I knew how, quietly, steadily, on my own. 6 years at a regional accounting firm. CPA license by 24. I worked fraud cases, sat in on depositions, reviewed finance statements the way other people read a person's face, looking for what was being hidden and where. My colleagues called me thorough. My supervisors trusted me with the cases nobody else wanted to touch. None of that mattered at family dinners. My father called it the number stuff and moved on. My mother said it sounded exhausting. My brother smiled at me from across the table with the particular smile of someone who has never once felt the need to work harder. The call came on a Thursday in September. "Family meeting Sunday," my mother said, and her voice had that electric quality it only got when she'd already decided something wonderful was happening. "Your brother has news." When I arrived, he had set up a presentation on the living room television. 3 restaurant locations across 2 counties, a franchise model. Year 1 revenue projections that, and I want to be precise here, assumed full capacity operations from opening day, 0 marketing spend, and a 38% net profit margin. He had color-coded slides. My father sat forward in his armchair like a man watching the final minutes of a championship game. "We're putting in $430,000, my father announced. "The property sale closed last week. We've already decided." My stomach dropped. That property was the only thing my parents owned outright. My grandfather had built it in 1974. They had rented it for 20 years and treated it as their safety net, the thing that would carry them when everything else ran out. "Can I just ask?" I started. "Faye," my mother's voice a warning. "I want to see the actual lease agreements for the 3 locations. And who are the anchor investors? Because without a proven concept, and at this scale, the working capital requirement alone." My brother set his pointer down. He wasn't angry. That was always the worst thing about him. He was never angry, just disappointed, quietly and loudly at the same time. Every time something good is happening for me, you find a way to make it about you. This isn't about me. This is $430,000 of money they can't replace. My father stood up. We believe in your brother. We'd appreciate it if you tried. I looked at my mother. She looked at my brother. That night, I went home and wrote a 14-page analysis. Realistic restaurant margin data from the National Restaurant Association. Failure rates for independent franchise concepts in years 1 through 3. A breakdown of what a proper working capital reserve would look like before a single location opened. I sent it to both my parents with a short note. Please read this before anything is transferred. I will pay for an independent financial review myself. Give me 2 weeks. That is all I'm asking. My mother replied 4 days later. We appreciate your concern. The first transfer has already moved. Your brother needed the lease deposit secured by end of week. I sat at my counter and read that sentence 3 times. I made a folder on my desktop and labeled it with my brother's company name. I was not building a case. I just needed proof, somewhere, in writing, that I had tried. 14 months went by. My brother's Instagram became a performance I watched from the outside. Grand openings, ribbon cuttings, tables full of people, 5-star reviews, a magazine feature in a local lifestyle publication. My parents' aunts had the ribbon-cutting photo framed and mounted above the fireplace. My father began referring to the restaurant group at holiday gatherings, the way men talk about things they built themselves. I noticed, gradually, that I had stopped being invited to those gatherings. At first, it was small enough that I could explain it away. A birthday dinner no one texted me about, a Sunday lunch I heard about afterward through a cousin. Then it became consistent. My aunt mentioned at a wedding that my parents had told her I was going through something. A mutual friend told me my brother had described me as jealous of his success. My mother stopped calling to catch up and only reached out when she needed something forwarded. A tax form, a phone number, a document she couldn't find. I stopped checking their social media. I stopped calling Sunday evenings. I focused on my work, my apartment, the small routines that made a life feel intentional rather than accidental. Then, 16 months after the investment, a bank called me on a Tuesday morning. Miss Kessler, we're following up on the commercial loan in your name. The cosigner account is 90 days delinquent. I asked them to repeat that. The joint commercial loan you co-signed in March of last year. I had never co-signed anything. I had never been to that bank. I had never seen that loan document. I was off the and calling my attorney within the hour. We filed a forgery report with the bank, a separate report with the county fraud unit, and submitted a sworn affidavit, a handwriting analysis, and employment records proving I had been 3 states away on the date my signature was allegedly made. We did everything in writing, through proper channels, on the record. I did not call my parents. I did not call my brother. I added the documentation to the folder. Have you ever had to make a decision where every option felt wrong, where staying silent felt like a betrayal of yourself, but speaking up guaranteed you'd be called the villain? If you have, I want to know in the comments what you chose. And if this story is hitting close to home, hit that like button. It genuinely helps. Now let me tell you what happened at Easter. 3 months after the forgery report, my mother called to invite me to Easter Sunday dinner. Her voice was bright and careful, the particular tone she used when she wanted something to feel normal. 20-some people. Your brother is announcing the 4th location. It would mean a lot. I almost said no. Part of me knew, the way you know things before they've happened, that whatever was building had nearly finished building. But another part, the part that still remembered searching a graduation crowd for my parents' faces, said go. See it through to the end. I wore a plain blue dress. I brought a bottle of wine. I sat at the far end of the table and watched my brother hold court the way he always had. Easy, certain, filling a room without trying. My mother touched his shoulder every few minutes. My father stood up to give a toast. This family has always believed in dreaming big, he said, glass raised. Some of us are still learning that lesson. He looked directly at me when he said it. He smiled. But your brother is proof that when you have vision and the courage to act, the numbers eventually follow. Laughter around the table. My aunt clinked her glass. I set my fork down very carefully and looked at my hands. The doorbell rang before dessert. 2 people in dark coats stood on the porch. The woman in front held up a badge. IRS Criminal Investigation Division. They were looking for my brother in connection with a bank fraud inquiry. The room went still in the way. Rooms only go still when something real has arrived. Not drama, not argument, but actual consequence. My brother stood up from his chair. His face did something I had never seen it do. It went completely blank, like a screen powering off. Then he pointed at me. She's on the loan documents. His voice was loud and deliberate, working the room the way he always worked a room. She co-signed. She knew the whole structure. You need to talk to her first. 22 people turned and looked at me. My mother's hand went to her mouth. My father said my name like a question he didn't want answered. The lead investigator glanced at my brother, then turned to me. Miss Kessler? Yes. We have your forgery report on file. You filed it 3 months ago. You're not under investigation. She turned back to my brother. He said my name 3 more times while they walked him toward the door. My father stood in the entryway and watched until the car was out of sight. Then he came back inside and sat down, and no one said anything for a very long time. The investigator pulled me aside near the kitchen before she left. She laid out what they had found. 2 of the 3 restaurants had never turned a profit. The third was structured as a shell company funneling revenue into a management LLC my brother owned and controlled alone. The loans, 4 of them in total, not one, amounted to just over $100,000, including my parents' original investment. He had paid himself a salary of $180,000 a year while telling investors the business was months away from breaking even. My father, she said quietly, had signed 2 of the quarterly disclosure reports. They would be examining his role. For what it's worth, she added, your forgery report is what flagged the loan portfolio to begin with. The bank audit that followed is what opened our file. She handed me a card with a victim services number on it. Your parents may need this. Civil suits are likely. My mother fainted before I could find my coat. Not dramatically. She simply sat down on the dining room floor, very quietly, and someone called for water. I stood in the kitchen doorway and watched the room try to reorganize itself around a reality it hadn't prepared for. I did not stay long after that. The weeks that followed moved fast and then very slowly. My brother was charged with wire fraud and bank fraud across multiple counts. He accepted a plea deal, 30 months, reduced from a possible 8 years. My father had signed those reports, he said without understanding their purpose. And maybe that was partly true, but the investigators didn't close the question cleanly. He was named in 4 of the civil suits brought by other investors. Legal fees came first, then the settlements, then what remained of my parents' accounts. By spring, they had moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in a complex 40 minutes from where they'd lived for 30 years. I found out about my grandfather's will on a gray Wednesday in November. He had separated one piece of his estate before he died, quietly, through a separate codicil, handled by an attorney my father had never met. A woodworking shop and the half-acre it sat on, outside town. My grandfather had run it for 40 years. He had left it to me specifically, with a handwritten note sealed in an envelope with my name on it. Faye, the note said, you always understood what something was actually worth, not what someone wanted it to be worth, what it was. Take care of this place, it already belongs to you. I just needed the paperwork to catch up. The property appraised at $290,000. I sat in that attorney's office and held the letter until my hands stopped shaking, and I cried. Not from sadness, but but from the particular relief of being seen clearly by someone who was no longer here to be thanked. My mother called 2 weeks later. She had heard about the property through my aunt. Her voice was different from any version of her voice I had known before, careful, smaller. The voice of someone who has had to begin asking instead of telling. That shop should probably go toward the legal costs, she said. The attorneys are saying, no. A pause. Your brother's situation alone requires. No, Mom. I kept my voice even. I'm not selling what Grandpa left me to cover consequences I tried to prevent 2 years ago. She went quiet. I love you, I said. And I meant it completely and without condition. But love doesn't mean I set myself on fire to keep someone warm. That's not what it means. She cried. Not the theatrical version I'd grown up watching, but something older and quieter and true. I don't know how to fix this, she said finally. Neither do I. But we can't even begin if we keep pretending there's nothing that needs fixing. I visited them once, in the 1-bedroom. I brought groceries, bread, pasta, canned soup, the specific brand of crackers my father had always kept in the pantry. My father looked at the bags and then at me for a long moment, and something crossed his face that I didn't have a word for yet. Not quite gratitude. Something underneath gratitude. Recognition. Late and unwelcome and real. We got it wrong, he said, with you. For a long time. Yes. I don't know how to. You don't have to know how yet, I said. I'm not disappearing, but I'm not pretending anymore either. I left without hugging him, not because I didn't want to, because I wasn't ready, and that was allowed. I'm sitting on the steps of my grandfather's woodworking shop right now, late afternoon light coming sideways through the trees, the smell of old sawdust still in the floorboards, even though no one has worked here in years. I have been cleaning it out slowly, one weekend at a time. I haven't decided yet what it will become. Maybe I'll find out. Maybe I'll keep it exactly as it is for a while, proof that someone saw me clearly before I fully learned to see myself that way. I still talk to my mother. Briefly, carefully, working towards something that doesn't have a name yet. My father is seeing a therapist, which 2 years ago he would have called unnecessary, so I take that as a signal that something in him is trying. My brother will finish his sentence in about a year. I haven't decided what I'll do with that information when the time comes. What I know now, sitting here with the quiet and the sawdust and the light. You cannot make someone see you. You can hand them every analysis, every spreadsheet, every projection broken down into plain language and double-checked for accuracy. And if they have already decided not to look, they will not look. That is not your failure. That is their choice. And when the truth arrives, because it always does with or without your help, you want to be the one still standing. Not the one who burned themselves down trying to drag someone else to safety before they were ready to be saved. My grandfather understood this. He didn't leave me the shop because I needed the money. He left it because he wanted me to have something solid to stand on when everything else was still uncertain. He wanted me to know, in a language more permanent than words, that he had been paying attention all along. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in any part of this story, the one whose expertise gets called jealousy, the one who gets praised for being so responsible while someone else gets celebrated, the one screaming clearly into a room that has chosen not to hear. I want to say this directly to you. You are not wrong. You are not too much. You are not small. You are standing in a room where people have decided not to see you. And, eventually, whether you stay or walk away, that room will have to reckon with everything it chose to look past. You don't have to be there for that moment. But if you are, wear something you feel good in. Thank you for listening to all of it. Drop a comment and tell me about a time you tried to warn someone who wasn't ready to hear it. Tell me what you did with that. I'll read every single one.